All right, so good. This tonight, we're going deep into some seriously weird internet stuff. You ready for this? We're looking at the Godlike Productions forum, specifically from Halloween 2024. It's like peeking into this digital cauldron of some pretty unique perspectives. You could say. Think about this: over 1,300 users active at the time, almost 400,000 visitors just on that day, and thousands of posts and the topics. Oh boy. You really got to buckle up for this. We've got stuff like Salem witches to honor special guests and fellow Christian Stormy Daniels. All the way to Idaho removes the COVID-19 vaccines from their clinics as unsafe for humans. And that's not even scratching the surface. There are also threats about schizophrenia and semen retention. Holy craply. And Koreans arrive on Ukraine border. And even white women are losers in the dating market. I mean, where else on the internet are you going to find this kind of variety?
It's a pretty wild mix, isn't it?
Yeah.
But really, what can we even learn from this bizarre mix of topics? Like, what does it even say about the people who are drawn to this forum? And maybe even about the online world in general. I'm honestly curious to hear what you think. What jumps out at you just from these initial stats and thread titles?
Well, it's definitely a fascinating bunch of topics. The sheer amount of activity just on this Halloween snapshot, I think, suggests a community that's really deeply engaged, drawn together by, a fascination with the fringe, controversial, and maybe even like a desire to challenge mainstream narratives.
Okay, so you're picking up on that kind of like contrarian spirit.
Yeah, definitely. And you have to remember that Godlike Productions has a long history as a forum that's dedicated to discussing conspiracy theories, paranormal stuff, alternative viewpoints. So it's not all that surprising to see those themes reflected in the thread titles, especially on a day like Halloween, which kind of blurs the lines between real and imagined anyway.
That's true. That's a good point. So we've got this community that loves the unconventional, the unexplained. But let's get specific. One thread that really caught my eye was Noah's Ark, possibly marked on world's oldest map from 3,000 years ago. Scientists. It's like the classic Godlike Productions mashup. You got biblical stories, alternative history, and a dash of what if.
What do you think is driving this fascination with trying to find evidence for these ancient stories, even if that evidence is maybe a little questionable?
It speaks to this deep human desire, I think, to connect with the past, to find proof of these stories that have been passed down for generations. In a world that often feels so uncertain and, rapidly changing, these old stories, they can give a sense of grounding, of continuity, even like this belief that there's a bigger plan at play.
Yeah, I can see that.
But there's also this layer of skepticism woven into these discussions. The forum users, they're quick to question mainstream interpretations of history. They challenge official explanations. They're looking for alternative narratives, for hidden truths that they think are being suppressed or ignored by the powers that be. It's interesting. It's like this tug of war between faith and skepticism, and it's all happening online. And speaking of skepticism, let's talk politics. It's 2024. It's election season. And it feels like every corner of the internet, including Godlike Productions, is buzzing with political debate. We see threads like, people can't vote Trump in Kentucky. And TikToker has insane breakdown because her dad is supporting Trump. They both reflect just how intense the emotions are around this election. But what I find interesting is how these discussions on Godlike Productions are different from what we're seeing in the mainstream media or even on other social media platforms. Is there a specific kind of flavor to the political discourse on this forum, like a certain lens through which they're viewing politics?
The Godlike Productions community, they often lean toward distrust of established institutions and this belief that people in power are working against the average person. So when it comes to politics, this skepticism, it can manifest as anxieties about election fraud, concerns about the media being manipulative, and just this general feeling that the system is rigged against them.
Okay, so it's like they're coming at it from a place of distrust from the start.
Yeah, exactly. This perspective isn't unique to Godlike Productions, of course. But it does seem to be amplified within this community. We're talking about an online environment where people with similar views can reinforce each other's beliefs and where alternative narratives can easily spread.
Yeah, makes sense. So it's like an echo chamber effect where existing beliefs are amplified and any skepticism towards mainstream narratives is encouraged.
Yeah, you could say that.
But it's not just politics that's fueling this distrust. There's a thread titled, Idaho removes the COVID-19 vaccines from their clinics as unsafe for humans, which seems to tap into this lingering anxiety and mistrust. That came from the pandemic. What I find striking is that even though the pandemic is largely behind us, the aftershocks in terms of misinformation and skepticism toward vaccines are still rippling online.
It shows how much power online communities have to shape beliefs and perceptions, even years after a major event. And with vaccines specifically, the pandemic made those existing anxieties worse. Anxieties about the government overreaching, about pharmaceutical companies, and even about scientific authority in general, the thread you mentioned. It's a perfect example of how these anxieties can form into specific narratives, even if they don't have any scientific evidence.
It's like a digital echo of the pandemic, still playing out in these forms years later. And speaking of echoes, I'm curious about how algorithms and filter bubbles contribute to this phenomenon. We hear a lot about these concepts, but can you break them down for us in the context of godlike productions? Like how might algorithms, that behind-the-scenes code that decides what we see online,
Yeah.
how might that be shaping the discussions on this forum?
Well, imagine an algorithm that's designed to keep users engaged by showing them content that they're likely to click on and interact with. In the case of godlike productions, that could mean that users who engage a lot with threads about conspiracy theories or alternative narratives, they're going to be shown more of that type of content, reinforcing their existing beliefs, and maybe even pushing them towards more extreme viewpoints. This is what creates a filter bubble effect, where users are only exposed to a limited range of perspectives and information, often reinforcing their biases and limiting their exposure to alternative viewpoints.
So it's like a self-reinforcing cycle. The algorithm learns what you like, and then it feeds you more of the same, creating this personalized echo chamber.
Exactly.
And this can have real-world consequences, right?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to things like vaccines or political elections, where having accurate information is so important for making informed decisions.
Absolutely. The spread of misinformation and the reinforcement of extreme viewpoints within these filter bubbles can erode trust in institutions, fuel social divisions, and even influence how people behave in the real world.
It's a lot to think about. So we've got this potent mix of distrust, online echo chambers, and algorithm-driven filter bubbles, all playing out against this backdrop of a very intense election year. But godlike productions isn't all doom and gloom. There's also a thread that's, well, a little more lighthearted. Schizophrenia and semen retention. Help me out here. What's going on in this thread, and what does it tell us about the variety of topics and the sometimes very personal nature of the discussions on godlike productions?
This thread highlights how the forum can be a space where people can share personal experiences, seek support, and explore unconventional ideas. However, it's also a reminder about the potential dangers of self-diagnosis and the spread of misinformation, especially with mental health.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Online communities can provide valuable support and a sense of belonging, but it's really important to approach information with a critical eye and seek professional help for serious health concerns.
Right. It's a reminder that online communities can be both helpful and harmful.
Exactly.
It's a double-edged sword. Another thread that caught my eye was, as I sit here on my piss-stained blankets on a couch, am I better off now than when I was married? Again, we see someone struggling with personal issues, maybe looking for validation or just someone to listen. What do you think motivates people to share these deeply personal struggles in such a public forum?
It shows the human need for connection and validation, the desire to share our burdens and get support, even if it's from strangers online. For some people, online forums offer a sense of anonymity and a space to express vulnerabilities that they might not feel comfortable sharing with people in their offline lives.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a reminder that behind every username, there's a real person with real-life problems. And sometimes these forums become like a digital confessional, where people feel safe expressing their anxieties and frustrations, even if it's in a chaotic and unfiltered way.
That's a good way to put it.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into godlike productions, from biblical archaeology and election anxieties to personal confessions and the complexities of algorithms, and it's clear that we've only scratched the surface. What other themes are emerging from these discussions, and what can they tell us about the state of online discourse in 2024? Let's continue our exploration in part 2.
I'm particularly intrigued by how these seemingly disparate threads, from anxieties about election fraud to personal struggles with relationships, they all connect to this broader narrative of distrust and disillusionment with established institutions.
Yeah, I'm starting to see those connections too. It's like there's this underlying current of skepticism running through almost every discussion, whether it's about politics or science or even personal relationships. It's as if the forum users are questioning the very foundations of the systems we live by.
You're right, and that skepticism, it can be directed towards governments, the media, scientific experts, even religious institutions. It's this pervasive sense that those in power are not to be trusted, that they're hiding something, or that they're actively working against the interest of the average person.
So it's not just about specific conspiracy theories, it's more like a fundamental worldview, a lens through which they view the world.
Precisely. And this worldview, it's incredibly difficult to challenge because any attempt to debunk a specific conspiracy theory or present factual information is often seen as further proof of a cover-up or an attempt to control the narrative. It's a bit like trying to argue with someone who's convinced the Earth is flat. No amount of evidence will sway them because they interpret everything through the lens of their pre-existing beliefs.
It's almost like they're trapped in this self-reinforcing cycle of distrust, where every new piece of information, regardless of its source or validity, is interpreted as confirming their existing beliefs. And this cycle can be made even worse by the nature of online communities themselves, right?
Absolutely. These forums, they can act as echo chambers, where like-minded individuals reinforce each other's beliefs, often without being exposed to alternative viewpoints or evidence-based information. This can lead to a phenomenon known as group polarization, where the beliefs of a group become more extreme over time as members are exposed to increasingly extreme views within the group. Think of it like a group of friends who all believe that aliens have visited Earth. If they only talk amongst themselves and share articles and videos that support this belief, they're likely to become even more convinced over time, even if there's no credible evidence to back it up.
Okay, so we've got this potent mix of distrust, online echo chambers, and algorithm-driven filter bubbles all contributing to this cycle of reinforcement. But let's zoom back in on some of the individual threads and see what they reveal about the specific fears and fascinations that are gripping the godlike productions community. We've already touched on threads about election fraud, DNA vaccines, and the prepper mentality. But one thread that really stood out to me was Elon Musk appearing to have worked in the U.S. without authorization, may now be denaturalized. What do you think this thread reveals about the community's views on powerful individuals, particularly those who are seen as disruptors or who challenge the status quo?
This thread, I think it taps into a broader anxiety surrounding figures like Elon Musk, those who amass significant wealth and influence, particularly in the tech sector. There's this sense that these individuals operate outside the rules that govern everyone else and that their actions can have profound and sometimes unpredictable consequences for society as a whole.
So it's not just about Musk himself, it's about what he represents, the anxieties he triggers within certain groups.
Exactly. And this can be applied to other figures as well, whether it's politicians, celebrities, or even religious leaders. These individuals become lightning rods for our hopes, our fears, and our anxieties about the future.
Okay, now, for a thread that I found both amusing and thought-provoking, Taylor Swift for Secretary of State.
Yeah.
Now, I love her music, but I'm not sure I see her negotiating international treaties. What do you think this thread, even if it's tongue-in-cheek, says about the community's views on traditional politics?
I think this thread reflects a growing disillusionment with traditional politics and a yearning for something different, something outside the established system. It's like a throw your hands up in the air kind of sentiment, a longing for anyone who seems authentic, relatable, and uncorrupted by the political machine.
So Taylor Swift, with her global icon status and reputation for being genuine and down-to-earth, becomes a symbol of this yearning for something different, something better.
Precisely. And this speaks to a broader trend of celebrity and influencer culture influencing our political perceptions and even our voting choices. In a world where trust in institutions is declining, people are looking for alternative sources of authority and inspiration, and sometimes those sources come from unexpected places.
Okay, one last thread I want to touch on before we move on. The rock and music gospel codes. This one seems to be diving deep into conspiracy theory territory, but it also touches on something that I think resonates with a lot of people. The search for meaning and hidden patterns in the world around us. What do you make of this?
It's a fascinating example of how conspiracy theories can tap into very human desires, the need to make sense of the world, to find order in chaos, and to believe that there's a deeper meaning behind seemingly random events. The idea that there are hidden codes embedded in music or popular culture can be appealing because it suggests that there's a hidden order to the universe, a secret knowledge that only a select few are privy to.
So even though we might scoff at some of these theories, there's something about them that taps into a very human need to make sense of the world, to find order in chaos.
Absolutely. And this need can be particularly acute in times of uncertainty and rapid change, when traditional belief systems and institutions are being questioned or even crumbling. Conspiracy theories, however outlandish they might seem, can offer a sense of control and understanding in a world that often feels overwhelming and unpredictable.
This brings us back to the idea of prepper mentality that we discussed earlier. There are a few threads that seem to reflect this mindset, the sense of preparing for the worst. We have breaking Iran begins moving ballistic missiles and platforms to strategic locations. Urgent EU Commission tells its citizens to stock up on supplies. And breaking. The USDA is now licensing DNA vaccines in our food. These all seem to tap into a primal fear of impending disaster or societal collapse. Could you unpack this prepper mentality for us a bit? What drives it, and how does it manifest in online communities like Godlike Productions?
The prepper mentality. It's a complex phenomenon driven by a mix of anxieties about the future economic collapse, political instability, natural disasters, pandemics, you name it. It's this idea that society as we know it is fragile and could collapse at any moment, requiring individuals to be self-sufficient and prepared to survive on their own. Online communities like Godlike Productions, they can be both a source of information and a platform for amplifying these anxieties. Users share tips on stockpiling supplies, building shelters, and developing survival skills. They discuss potential threats and scenarios, often drawing on conspiracy theories and alternative narratives to reinforce their beliefs.
It's like a digital manifestation of the bunker mentality, right?
Exactly. And this mentality can be fueled by a number of factors, including economic uncertainty, political instability, and even climate change anxieties. In a world that often feels increasingly unpredictable and threatening, these forums can provide a space for people to share their fears, exchange survival tips, and find a sense of community with others who share their concerns. It's important to note, though, that while preparedness can be a responsible approach to uncertainty, it can also be exploited, leading to paranoia, distrust, and even harmful actions. It's crucial to approach these discussions with a critical eye, separating genuine concerns from unfounded speculation and fear-mongering tactics.
Okay, so we've seen how anxieties about the future, distrust of authority, and the search for meaning can manifest in these online communities. But I'm curious about another aspect of Godlike Productions that we haven't touched on much yet, the humor. Even in the midst of these intense discussions, there's a thread dedicated to their annual pumpkin carving contest. What does this tell us about the community and the ways in which they use humor to cope with these anxieties?
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the internet, even in communities that often focus on doom and gloom, there's still room for laughter, creativity, and a sense of shared humanity. Humor can be a powerful coping mechanism, a way to release tension, build connections, and find light in the midst of darkness.
It's like a virtual Halloween party, complete with spooky stories, costume contests, and maybe even a few digital ghost stories around the campfire.
Indeed. And this element of playfulness and shared enjoyment is something that's often overlooked when discussing these online communities. It's a reminder that these are real people with diverse interests and emotions, and that their online interactions are not solely defined by their anxieties or their beliefs in conspiracy theories.
It's like we're seeing the full spectrum of human experience playing out in this digital space, the fears, the hopes, the humor, the struggles, and even the moments of joy and connection. We've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive, exploring the themes of distrust, echo chambers, the allure of conspiracy theories, the prepper mentality, and even the role of humor in coping with uncertainty. But there's still so much more to unpack. In the final part of our deep dive, let's step back from the digital world and connect these online trends to broader societal issues, examining what they reveal about the state of humanity in 2024. What do you say? Ready for the final plunge?
What's particularly fascinating is
Okay, so we've explored this strange and fascinating world of Godlike Productions, from conspiracy theories and election anxieties to personal confessions and even pumpkin carving contests. But now let's zoom out a bit and consider the bigger picture. What is this deep dive into this online forum often dismissed as like fringe or extreme? What does it tell us about the state of humanity in 2024? What broader societal trends are reflected in these digital discussions?
what I find really striking is how this snapshot of Godlike Productions, this glimpse into this digital subculture, actually mirrors many of the anxieties, the hopes, the struggles that are playing out on a much larger scale in society. It's like we're looking through a distorted lens, but the underlying themes are very familiar.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
Right.
It's like we're looking at a funhouse mirror reflection of the real world. The features are exaggerated, but it's still recognizably us.
Exactly. And one of the most prominent things we've seen is this sense of uncertainty and distrust. It's not just about specific conspiracy theories, it's a broader feeling that the systems we've relied on are failing us, that the future is uncertain, and that those in power are not to be trusted. This is something we see in political debates and social media discussions, even in casual conversations. It's a global phenomenon, and it's fueling a lot of the anxieties we're seeing online.
Right. It's like this constant low-level hum of unease, this feeling that something is fundamentally wrong, even if we can't quite put our finger on it. And you're saying this feeling is reflected in the godlike productions forum.
Absolutely. And I think it's driven by a bunch of factors: economic inequality, political polarization, climate change, rapid technological advancements, the erosion of traditional social structures and belief systems. We're living in an era of unprecedented change and uncertainty, and it's causing a lot of anxiety for people all over the world.
It's like we're all standing on this rapidly melting iceberg trying to find solid ground while the world shifts beneath our feet.
That's a powerful image. And it leads to this natural yearning for stability, for certainty, for something to hold on to in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and unpredictable. This yearning can manifest in different ways: embracing conspiracy theories, retreating into echo chambers, seeking solace in alternative spiritualities, even clinging to apocalyptic ideologies.
So it's like a search for meaning, a search for answers in a world that seems to have lost its compass.
Precisely. And this search for meaning can be both constructive and destructive. It can lead to personal growth, spiritual awakening, even social progress. But it can also lead to fanaticism, extremism, and even violence. The challenge is to channel this search for meaning in a way that promotes understanding, empathy, and constructive action rather than division and fear.
That makes a lot of sense. But let's talk about technology's role in all of this. We've discussed how online communities can act as echo chambers, amplifying certain narratives and creating filter bubbles that shield users from alternative viewpoints.
Yeah.
How does this play into the bigger picture of societal anxieties and the search for meaning?
Technology, especially social media and online platforms, has completely changed the way we consume information and connect with each other. While these platforms offer incredible opportunities for communication and sharing knowledge, they've also created new challenges. Algorithms designed to keep us engaged can unintentionally fuel echo chambers and filter bubbles, reinforcing our existing beliefs even if they're not accurate or even harmful. This can lead to a distorted view of the world where our anxieties are amplified and our understanding of complex issues is oversimplified.
So it's not just about the content itself. It's about the way we consume it, the algorithms that shape our online experience, and the communities that influence our perceptions.
Exactly. And this brings up a really important question. How do we navigate this complex digital world in a way that promotes critical thinking, empathy, and constructive dialogue rather than division and distrust?
Okay, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't think there's an easy answer.
Yeah.
But where do we even start to address this?
I think it starts with awareness. We need to be more aware of the forces that are shaping our online experiences, the biases that influence our perceptions, and the ways in which technology can both connect us and divide us. We need to develop this healthy skepticism towards information online, learn to identify misinformation, and seek out diverse perspectives.
So it's about being more mindful about what we consume online, checking facts, and engaging with different viewpoints, even those we might not agree with.
Exactly. And it's about developing our critical thinking skills, learning how to evaluate information sources, and understanding the biases that are built into these online platforms and algorithms. It's not about rejecting technology completely, but learning to use it in a way that promotes making good decisions and having constructive conversations.
It's about finding that balance between healthy skepticism and just outright distrust, between engaging with different perspectives and retreating into our own little echo chambers.
Exactly. And it's about remembering that even in these dark corners of the internet, even in the most strange or outlandish conversations, there are still glimpses of humanity, of shared anxieties, of this yearning for connection and understanding.
You know, that's a really beautiful thought. And it reminds me of something you said earlier about godlike productions being this distorted mirror image of the real world. Maybe by looking into that mirror, by confronting those anxieties and extremes, maybe we can find a way to reflect on our own beliefs, challenge our own assumptions, and ultimately build a better, more compassionate world, both online and offline.
I couldn't agree more. By understanding the fears and motivations that drive these online communities, we can find ways to bridge the divides, foster empathy, and create a digital space that reflects the best of humanity rather than the worst. We have the power to shape our digital future, and it starts with recognizing our shared humanity and engaging with each other with understanding and respect.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thank you so much for guiding me through this deep dive into godlike productions. It's been a wild ride, but incredibly insightful.
The pleasure was all mine. And remember, this journey of discovery doesn't end here. There's always more to explore, more to learn, and more to understand about the world, both online and offline.
And who knows what other strange and fascinating corners of the internet we'll be diving into next. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay connected.